Hi, this is Dr. Scott Young, and today we're going to do kind of a shorter one. I want to give you an economic update, and we're going to show you all about how the Fed is collapsing. Coming right up. Okay, well, remember, can you do me a favor? Can you subscribe to the channel? If you haven't, really helps me out. Major big deal. Okay? All right, so let me show you all about this. So let's talk a little bit about the Fed and that collapse. Now remember, I don't sell crypto, QFS crypto. It is a fake thing. Don't do it ever, ever, ever. All of those idiots on Twitter, Facebook, Telegram, TikTok, Instagram are all fakes. There's so many bot fakes. Don't listen to them. Okay? Ignore, block. You don't have to send it to me because I already know about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. There's probably more than 1,000 of them at this time that I know of. Just block and delete. Trust me, this is a military thing that's going to kind of come. Okay? All right. So let's go through this a little bit and we'll show you all the fun stuff. This is a cool quote. James Garfield, a past president, got to know your history a little bit. The truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable. Now, this is kind of a play on a quote in John. You shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. I had a professor in college who total non-believer, right? And she was like, I'm sitting behind, behind another student's kind of a bigger guy, and she said she walked out in the forest and goes, "Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." And I'm like, because it's like, what are you talking about, idiot? So this is a real cool way about this. Now, we're not talking about truth. We're not talking about truth of the word. We're talking about this kind of truth here. Kind of cool. All right, here we go. Let's do some just basic kind of conversations of inflation levels. Okay, so this is over a period of time before World War, the beginning of World War II for us, all the way up to before World War I. Now, if you notice that this line is zero before the Fed exists. Did you know that gold price was $20.60 back in the late 1800s, and it was $20.60 all the way up until 1929. Now, if you notice that there is a zero inflation point, even all the way through all of the Great Depression. So think about that for a second. The Great Depression starts in 1929, and we have zero to negative influence of of increased of cash, because we actually didn't have an increase of cash here. What inflation, one of the points you're going to see here in just a second, is really inflation also has a role in debt. And this is the 14th Amendment under the fourth section that stipulates that foreign debts are not something you have to pay for. That's why when some people have said to you, now I think debt is up, what, 35 trillion? We're talking about the Fed debt. And in the 14th Amendment under the fourth section says foreign agencies try to saddle American citizens with a debt. It's not payable by you. Constitutional law. Now, the other side of this craziness is this. Some people have said, "Oh, well, we paid back $21 trillion of debt." We're not paying back the cabal so that they could fund themselves all over again. We're canceling that particular debt. We're not going to pay them a penny for it and shove it down their throat. But the reality is, this inflationary point was a relation to how much money they were spending. So they were giving a ton of money away to the allies to create a level of debt. And we see that same thing happen. So wars, they love that kind of stuff so that they can have the booming of the 20s that had a negative inflationary point, which means it was very easy to spend money in that way and prices would be lower. Now, I just want to read some of this to you here because lots of people misunderstand it. When you have lower inflation, now this is actually from a real Cabal source here, okay? Lower inflation without the ability to print money, expand the money supply, the inflation is likely to be lower. Yeah, because you didn't, print money just for no reason, right? Lower inflation is always put forward as a main virtue of gold standard. But this will give greater stability in the economy, encouraging investments and growth. Deflation, the problem that is the problem is that if there are limited expansions in the money supply and an overvalued exchange rate, an economy could easily end up deflated, right? And basically it's like it's a horrible thing. That's why we had the Fed. We had to have the Fed. Debt inflation. If a gold standard causes deflation, as seen in the 20s and 30s, and we didn't have deflation, it went back to an original number. Okay, so let me go backward here a step. Oops, excuse me. There was deflation of that. That's a good thing, right? This is a great time. And see, their statements are so lies, it's not even funny to deal with that. Falling prices would increase the value of the debt. Yeah, but you guys were the ones that created this, right? And so a gold standard could easily constrain the growth of money supply developed by the economies has often grown by 5 to 7%. Come on. This is what they want you to believe. This is what most economists look at. And I'm like going, guys, you're smoking weed. You have drank the Kool-Aid too much. Okay, step away. Economic change from 13 to 29. So this is during World War One. Obviously the Fed, because that's 1913, and by the way, IRS is in that time frame as well. And then we have all the way through 29, so up to the stock market crash, which was fake anyway. So some of the numbers I want you to see here, and I don't want you to focus on these. These are just large increases, okay? But overall, the price had raised in that time frame or risen by around 3-ish%. Okay? When we look at almost all of these, they're not that much difference. Overall, this is just the actual values at that time frame. So you're talking about a 3-ish% growth on overall everything in that time frame. What's fascinating, again, 3% growth here on prices, but wages increased 51%, and it's just a basic percentage of an overall area from 13 to 25. Global trade increased dramatically because they were selling weapons mostly, all the way to 71%. The economy was going gangbusters. And this is before we are on the gold standard, or when we were on the gold standard, but the Fed was trying to mess with us, right? Now, here's what happens when we go into the economic change of 29 through 33. And I'm just focusing on 33 because that's before the gold standard was ripped away from us. Okay? Those prices go into a negative number. That's what they're supposed to do when you have bad economies, right? It should go down by a -1% or whatever, in that time frame. So they reduced by 1%. Wages reduced by 25%. The global trade was down 66%. It was a big problem. Okay. So, but it wasn't, if you had a little bit of money, beyond the stock market, beyond the other thing, you were okay. You could handle a 25% loss in your income because prices weren't killing you. So if you were upper class kind of area. Now there really wasn't middle class in the same way that you think of in that time frame. There sort of was, but not really there. There was really the poor, there were the wealthy, and then there were the extreme wealth, the cabal kind of wealth. So that's fascinating that we see this. And I'm going to refer back to this in a second. Okay. Now, when we go to 2019, so this is when Trump was in and all the way through the end of last year, because I don't really want to talk about 2024 because there's not real actual yearly data yet. So here's what happens. Wages reduce by 3% in this time frame, meaning everyone had a lowering of this, but also everyone has increase in price. Now, let me go backward here for just a second because I want you to see this. During the Great Depression, 25% reduction in wages and 1% reduction in the price. But now we come to what people say, well, we could be in another, in a recession. And I'm going, when you see the wages going down 3% and prices are up by 26%, and that's just over a very short time frame. And COVID, global trade, it'll show a massive drop and then an increase of drops, and that could be weird, kind of stuff. So it's I wouldn't look at global trade on an overall basis with that. But here's a piece of data I want you to see. This is fascinating. This is how they lie to you. Wages are this blue line from basically from March of 2020. So this is right during the pandemic, all the way up to here. So you're not even seeing less than what? A couple percent growth in wages. Now, okay, remember that's wage issues, right? Now we see inflation when Trump was still in office. Inflation is really, really low in that kind of area. Now it starts to rise. Now, as soon as Joey gets in here, we see a massive rise in inflation and even higher levels of inflation point. Now, it says that they reduced the inflation and it's down to a much more reasonable rate. That is a freaking lie because we still haven't talked about debt. And I showed you earlier, debt is one of the major reasons why we have inflation. And yet they're lying to you with charts like this. This is an absolute lie from the pit of hell. Now, here's a fascinating little thing here. And I don't want you to get too worried about, the different charts here, but basically we're talking about adjusted income after taxes. And then we have change of adjusted market income. So basically most people were losing on the highest quintile. So this is, 5 points that they're looking at. The highest quintile in 2023 are having maybe more like a 6 to 8% drop in their ability to buy things. So this is putting income and price out there. So that's a big deal. Now I want you to think about it. We're talking about up to 10% amount that you're having to spend toward adjusted gross income. So let me just sit here for a second. I'm going to pull this off the screen for a half sec. And I want you to listen to me for a second. If the average income, by the way, this is pretty close, of a household, that could be at least, maybe 1 to 2 people working. In most households, 2 people are working. And they're making $60K together. That's $5,000 a month. Now, I'm not taking tax in this way here, in that circumstance, because tax would probably be about $3,800 when you kind of see what your adjusted gross income is. But we'll just use the same math. $5,000 going down by 10%, that's $500 more a month. Or if you want to use the tax rate, because some people say it's at $4,000 or $3,800 or $3,500. They're paying, 10%, $350, $400 more a month. Now, if you look at most people like Dave Ramsey does this and talks about you need to be saving 10%. People can't save 10% and forget it. Because I've shown you other statistics that the massive majority don't have much of a savings anyway. 80% of the people have less than $1,000 to $5,000 in savings. And it's being eaten up This is why we are so close to this thing collapsing on itself with that. So these are the Scott predictions I told you back in 2020. The Fed would be dead. Did you know that Massey put together HR 8421 that says, and he put it in the middle of May, he said, to abolish the Fed. I've been telling you that for a long time. Debt rose from 22 trillion up to $35 trillion in 2024. That is a disgusting number. And it's never been like that before. And you go, well, as a percentage, and I'm going, when you take $1 trillion, it's a massive amount of money to pay the interest on it. If interest rates are 2%, 2.5%, 3%, if you're talking about mortgage rates, which means that the interest rates from the Fed would be like, 0.5, 0.7. Well, they're not that way anymore. You can't afford these kinds of debts because now interest rates are 7 and 8% if you're trying to buy a house, or if you're looking at what the Fed rate is like 5 to 6% in that range. And so it is disgusting. I mean, the banks are trying to make a profit on that number with that. I said to you, gold-backed currency would happen. Well, guess what? The BRICS are doing it. They are the Jasara initialization. And Zimbabwe just did it last month. That's why we were kind of wondering if Nasara was kind of floating in here on a quicker level than last month. The debt to GDP ratio has gone from when I was fired by a financial consultant here in the Tulsa area, when I told him, you can't live with 121%, GDP ratio, which is a GDP ratio with debt. That's like debt to income. Okay, when we think about this, 121%. If you have 30%, you can declare bankruptcy. I remember being 90% and I was swallowed by the debt. America is at 121%, but the interest rates in 2020 were reasonable, so you could kind of pay the debt load of this. Now, debt is absolutely out of line. And we're talking about 135%. Well, it's like, that's not much difference. I've been hearing, and that at the time, I remember I heard from my financial planner, Japan has been 190% debt to GDP. And I'm like, and that's what you think that you want to live on? Now that the interest rates that the central banks come to, they're going, they're about ready to collapse. And I mean, collapse in a giant way with this. Because even in 1980, when we were in the middle of a massive recession, we were only at 35% debt to GDP ratios. The Fed spending was 4.4 trillion in 2019 and 6.6 trillion in 2024. Like, if you're in the middle of debt, you should be spending less. But no, this is how sick these idiots are, right? That's why everyone in Congress, everyone in Senate, all the morons need to go. Every single one of them. I've said to you the US dollar would go to the US note, and we have a death of the dollar, but it will go in a 1-to-1 ratio. They're not going to screw you. Now, some people don't believe me on this one. But by the way, if I was right on this one, and I was right on this one, and I was right on this, and I was right on that, can you please trust me that I'm right on this one? The only thing that's going to fix this is Nasara, guys. You can't wait for Trump to get back in office. I mean, there's a congressman that everyone kind of likes, and he was saying to a lot of people like, well, we need Trump to be back in office so we can fix the inflation. Trump's not fixing the inflation. The fix is Nasara, and Trump is a part of this, okay? This is a white hat military issue. That's why I say this is a military thing. We are on the verge of this, guys. hold on. I promise you this thing is coming to an end. Thanks so much.